All right, everyone, there's a little bit of a problem right now in Macedonia. What happened is that the speaker of their parliament, or their legislative body there, is an ethnic Albanian, and this has reawoken some old tensions within this region of the world. Now, you'll notice, I'd like to say something aside before I get into the meat and bones of what specifically happened. It has to do with the storming of their parliament by protesters, people who are Macedonian nationalists and so forth. When you look at some of the smaller, more out-of-the-way states in the world, what do you see? Within their legislative bodies especially, and think Venezuela, Macedonia, some of these others. You see quite frequently, in times of political turmoil, when a ruling party has been supplanted in some way, people end up beating on each other, people end up sparring. Their legislative body does not appear to resemble that of the so-called civilized world. Now, does it? Now, here's the key. The globalists that are in control of most of the world realize something. They don't need to control every legislator in the world. They don't need to control every government in the world. They simply need to control the larger military and economic apparatuses of the greater nations, that is, those with significant projective military force, nuclear weapons, and so forth. Therefore, the US, UK, and France are the seats of globalism in the world today. Russia may or may not be part of that. I think of Russia as more controlled opposition, at least in the military sense. China's probably not. They're a little bit out there. They have their own little sphere. As far as Western globalism, and I would assume that the Chinese are imperialistic in that sense too, and possibly the Russians separately. Those are the three governments primarily that are controlled, and the German government to an extent as well, despite not being a nuclear state. Therefore, in these smaller states, when some upstart political movement comes in, the corporate media or the state media within that state browbeats them, labels them a Nazi or something like that. And these propaganda tactics are used within the entire globalist core. Therefore, you have a state like Macedonia. It doesn't have a significant military presence. No offense to the Macedonian people, but it's relatively small. It's landlocked. Relatively minor economy and military on the world stage. Kind of, backwoodsy in the economic and diplomatic sense. Therefore, the globalists don't attempt to restore order automatically simply because there happens to be an issue like this in their legislature. Now, what actually happened is that the leftists there, they have their ethnic Albanian speaker. And this has enraged Macedonian nationalists. Now, I wonder why. This is a touchy subject for this entire region of the world. I mean, this could happen in Serbia, Croatia, Albania, or any of these other states. There's a lot of bad blood within this region, within what used to be Yugoslavia proper and surrounding areas. There's a lot of tension between the more nationalistic sides, the more conservative sides, which doesn't necessarily, by the way, mean right-wing fiscal policies, generally speaking, between them and between more of the liberals side, the social democrats and socialists outright, communist parties and so forth. A natural tension that simply takes place. Now, will it calm down or will it continue? Who knows? That's impossible to say. People may settle down, or there may be a total overhaul of the entire system. Another thing that we see sometimes in some of the smaller states in the world is that they rapidly overthrow government after government, and this causes them to be listed as failing or flawed republics or democracies or something. I know they downgraded the U.S. As soon as Trump was elected, they downgraded us to a flawed democracy as though we haven't been one for at least 30 years, and probably longer than that. That was a bunch of bullcrap. These artificial labels that are handed out like candy to different states, they really don't mean anything. It's like human rights abuses. Oh, do you have a free media or not a free media? Supposedly we have a pretty free media in the United States. I don't know about that. I think they're co-opted by establishment politicians and by international banks, but, okay, I guess. At least I'm free to criticize them. Of course, I have to use YouTube and Twitter and stuff for that. Can't go on CNN and actually say, "Oh, I'm going to supply a rebuttal today because everything you say is full of shit." Just doesn't happen. But yeah, Macedonia is having some issues, but issues are nothing new within this region. It's not a huge surprise when these things happen. It's like Romania there, where they had, I believe, an Islamic individual there leading their country in a de facto sense for a while and stuff. Some people were upset about that. You look at what happens in Greece. And this whole region is not entirely stable. And people often, in the United States, I think, they think of Europe, and what they're actually thinking of, they're thinking of the British Empire and the French and things, or Sweden or something like that. They don't even necessarily really think about some of these small cities. They couldn't even find them on a map. The average American couldn't find Macedonia on a map. I can't even pronounce the name of their capital. Apologies for that. But at least I know where the state is and something about its history. And that's more than 99% of the population can accomplish when we're talking about some of these smaller states. I would assume Greece and maybe Romania are the only ones in the region that the average person would kind of know. It's problematic, though, when you have these states with a huge amount of ethnic tension. It's problematic when something crosses that ethnic line within the sense of government. And again, it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with fiscal issues. More often it has to do strictly with the nationalistic side of ethnicity, sort of this regional cobbling together of these states. For a while they were conjoined, and there were problems, and then there was ethnic bloodshed between them. You'd think of the issue over Kosovo or something like that. And it just sort of happens. Things split apart, they conglomerate, different political parties overthrow one another, they call for their support. It's a little bit like Venezuela, when the opposition says, oh, our supporters should take to the streets. Now, I may be sympathetic with their cause because Maduro's a nut, but it is the same basic principle. Oh, well, yeah, we're not going to judge that this individual is actually legitimately in power at this point. The same as Maduro saying to his militias or his fans, oh, rise up and kill the capitalist pigs or whatever, because it's not a legitimate legislative body anymore because it disagrees with my policies. And this is the hallmark of, in a way you could say, an independent state. Now this takes us into something interesting here. When I was speaking with Molyneux, I pointed out that globalism is simply an amplification of the problems that happen on a national level to begin with. Anytime you have a nation, you're going to have similar problems to what globalism causes, only on a smaller level. Here we see what happens when those problems boil over. We get Venezuela, or we get what's happening in Macedonia, or something like, or certainly what's happening in Turkey. In the absence of globalist control, direct globalist control, those issues fester, and governments, they collapse, they get overthrown. You have social alienation on its own level without globalism there. Globalism simply takes it and makes it a worldwide problem, and takes the worst elements of the worst states that have ever existed, puts them on an international stage and makes them worse. That's why I'm not a globalist. I stand against it. By the way, quick pointing out here, when Trump says, oh, I'm both a nationalist and a globalist, I'm going to assume that he's just fucking with people's heads. Either that, or he's got a different definition in mind for one or both definitions than, maybe many of his fans would consider to be the definitions of nationalism and globalism. I'm assuming probably what he means is, oh, I'm an American imperialist. I want to throw our weight around for a change instead of bowing before, like, the UN or something. In which case, that's fine. But I can't be sure exactly what he meant by that. It's a little bit mystifying, I will admit. But I'm not going to read too much into it. Macedonia has problems. Brazil has problems. You look at the world right now. Doesn't it seem like problems have proliferated to a level that we haven't seen in a long time, like maybe the eve of World War II or something like that? Seems to me that things were a little bit more peaceful than they currently were, maybe a decade or 2 decades ago, generally speaking. I think U.S. foreign policy helped put things into motion that are making the world worse. Specifically the Bushite corporatist policies and Obama's corporate policies within places like Iraq and Libya. I think that primarily is the driver of much of the destabilization in the world today. Then you have, of course, some socialist government like Venezuela. Their own totally independent decisions are what's driving their misery. Or Brazil. Certainly North Korea is not part of world globalism. I know a lot of people, I would even spar with Varg on this, I think. when he talks about North Korean minerals. Oh, that's the reason that we're drawing up our guns against North Korea. Actually, the liberation of North Korea would cause the price of those minerals to rise significantly because they'd be extracted by people who would have minimum wage laws. It's actually probably the opposite of what globalists would want. They probably want those minerals to keep getting imported into China cheap because they've already exported all of their industry to China. Therefore, they actually benefit. It drives down the price of creating those goods for all the globalists. They still keep the prices high when they re-import them. They'll shave like 2 pennies off of the cost per bulk item, and then they'll lower workers' wages because they say, oh, well, yeah, bottom line, we got to think about our company's assets and stuff. Meanwhile, they're making a killing over in China. I think it's the opposite of what globalists want. I think Trump might be being an anti-globalist when he suggests that there's the possibility we would get involved in North Korea. Another reason why I have no problem with regime change there. As far as Syria, leave them alone. Leave the Libyans alone. Leave the Venezuelans alone, honestly. North Korea, a little bit different of an issue. Macedonia, of course, is no North Korea. It's just an insular, landlocked, not fully functioning, I guess, state with ethnic issues, as all states within the region tend to have. It's sort of the status quo, honestly. It just happens from time to time. That's about all. Peace out.